you talked about 100% certainty of a housing crash.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
There is a 100% certainty of a housing crash in this era. Again, I'm talking about something that you wouldn't expect to hear, right?
Yeah.
I'm telling you what you would have expected to hear. There would be no reason for you to show up. How could there be a 100% certainty of anything that I'm even going to wake up tomorrow? No one has complete clairvoyance. How could you say there's going to be a 100% chance of a housing crash? That's because we already had it. Did you miss it? It occurred. It occurred in the spring of 2020. But I'm glad you asked, Julie, because people wonder, why do you say there's a 100% certainty of a housing crash? The housing crash that occurred in spring of 2020, more than 3 years ago, was a housing supply crash.
Oh, yeah.
Giant crash in the supply of available homes. And maybe you're thinking I'm just trying to use sensationalization or semantics or something like that. No, I posit that a supply crash is a bigger deal than a price crash. A supply crash helps hedge against a price crash. That's what's happening lately, even among higher mortgage rates. You don't have as many bidders on homes as you did a couple years ago, but with this huge millennial cohort that's in prime home buying years, that still keeps a few bidders on the very few available homes that there are. Depending on what numbers you want to look at, we've had about a 60% supply crash from back when we had a normal amount of American housing supply in 2017 or 2018. So the crash occurred. It is clearly a bigger deal than a price crash, because come on, I mean, this is kind of sad, but a supply crash in housing, we're anywhere between 1.5 and 5 million housing units undersupplied, depending on the source you look at. That's a big deal. I mean, that might be why you see more homeless people in your town. It's really sad. So yes, the housing crash is 100% certain because it already occurred. It's worse than a price crash. It's a supply crash, and the supply crash hedges against the price crash. Really kind of a sad thing. Here we are, the most powerful nation in the world by a lot of measures, with the strongest military and biggest economy and biggest brand, and yet we have a hard time housing our own people.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm in California, so I see a lot of it.
Yeah.
Let's open it up. Again, a live conversation with our industry expert, Keith Weinhold, who has a question.
Keith, thank you so much for your video, and Sean for popping that into the chat. My question is, it's the housing crisis. There's always a crisis. We like to blame things on certain things, but doesn't it just seem like the whole effect, cause of all of these different crises is just simply the impact of the dollar globally with inflation, and that these are side effects that happen when the power of the dollar is lessened? So it's not one thing that creates this. You could just comment on that, I guess, maybe.
Yeah, it's sort of a race to the bottom. When we owe China trillions, we have an incentive to debase our dollar. It gets easier for us to pay back our debtors like China. So yeah, everyone that owes debt to someone else kind of has this race to the bottom, and every incentive to want to go ahead and create more currency, because that makes it easier for everyone else to pay back their debts. So really what we can do then, Candace, is we're kind of taking a page out of the Fed's book. If we can't beat them, join them. Let's get a lot of debt ourselves, where the payments are outsourced to tenants, and then inflation debases that debt for us. It's really, if you can't beat them, join them strategy. The central banks and the Fed are more powerful than me, so let's just align my strategy with what they're doing.
Interesting. Sean, what do you got?
Hey, Keith, thanks for all of that info. I'm going to have to go home here in a minute and let my head explode. Just a lot of great info. I had never thought about it the way you put it, on the letting that as a stream of income, really, I mean, as a one of the ways you get paid. And I'm going, that was just mind blowing. One of the things I love to say about debt is that, debt is amazing, but you got to remember it's like a power tool. If you don't use it the right way, you might lose a limb. And so what are your thoughts on how much leverage is too much? Where's a good sweet spot?
Yeah, well, I'm really glad that you bring that up, because really I've mostly talked about the positive benefits of leverage, Sean. Just like leverage can amplify gains, to your point, I think what you're saying is it can also amplify losses. And that's why really I go back to the market is more important than the property framework. The definition of being over leveraged, to your question, is when you cannot service your debt payments anymore. Rents are really resilient. Even during the 2008 global financial crisis, there was only an attrition of about 4% in rents. So it's about being in a diverse market and buying where your rent income meets or exceeds all your expenses. I don't like to buy where my rent income is 10% less than all my expenses and just hope rents will catch up to it sometime. Because what if they don't? What if that market turns and now the property price is going down and my rents aren't appreciating and I'm already underwater? I'm probably in real trouble. So again, the definition of over leverage is when you cannot service your debt payments, and strategies for staying out of it are being attentive to the market, knowing that the market is more important than the property, and not buying based on hope, buying on the numbers today with income meeting or exceeding expenses. Great question.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. And yeah, hope is definitely not a strategy.
Yeah. Matt, what's your question?
So thanks, really. Thanks, Keith. My first income property was also a fourplex.
Oh, cool.
And I wish I still held on to it. It would be paid off by now. But my question has to do with return on amortization, which is a phrase you used.
Yeah.
As your tenants pay down your mortgage, you get more value. So how's that different than return on equity? Is it similar? How would you compare those two terms?
Yeah, I think of return on equity as your annual cash flow divided by the amount of equity that you have in the property. That's your ROE, or your return on equity. Your return on amortization is how much principal your tenants pay down for you each year divided by your equity. And return on amortizations have been under attack now. Return on amortizations have gone down for new property purchases these past couple of years. That is one negative consequence of higher mortgage rates, because less of your tenants' payment for your mortgage is going toward principal and more of it is going toward interest. But yeah, those are how I would do the two calculations. And that's why the ROA attrition has been occurring for the last 2 years.
Cool, thanks.
I would say in this market, we really are looking for return of capital as opposed to return on capital. So many of investors are in the bridge lending, and so difficult, such a challenging environment right now. So, all right, any other questions? Anybody want to, again, live conversation with an industry expert. This is your opportunity.
I think that Keith did a great job in going through all of the issues that we're going through right now. I would like to ask you, Keith, do you have any ear to the ground on liquidity and what's going on? Because I see a lot of people calling and saying, hey, we thought we could raise the money, but we close in less than 30 days and we can't raise it. We need help. Would you like to partner? And so I'm just trying to see if you see that and where you think that's headed.
Yeah, because I think people are great question, because I think people kind of get bathed in this media bath today of, affordability is just awful. And it is. It has gotten a lot worse. It's really the worst for the first-time home buyer. It's really bad for the flipper with low supply in today's environment. But it can be good for the investor if your debt structure is right, when you're paid 5 ways and supply is so low that if you have clean, safe, affordable, functional units, it's going to be occupied. Does that help somewhat?
Yes, it does. And I also think that from talking to people that cannot afford these apartments or increases, that they're just taking a step down. They're either partnering with somebody else for roommates, or they're going to RVs and mobile parks. And I think we're going to have a crisis in that, because some of the people just can't afford that.
That is such a smart comment, Paula. You bring up a really astute point. A lot of people think of markets as being static. Say wages are going up 5%. How in the heck could you raise the rent then 10% or 20%? It's more difficult to get those rent increases now, but we just came off an era of exceptionally high rent increases. It's that sometimes renters step down a class. They move from an A-class property to a B class, or a B class to a C class. So the person that's paying your higher rent, your 20% higher rent now than what it was 2 years ago, they might have stepped down a class. So markets aren't static. That's a great point. Yes, many step down a class, Paula.
And I also see one more thing, that in Austin, we've always had these increases since 2008. And when COVID hit, there was a temporary bump down, but then And after a couple months, it just started going up, 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 up. And, there was a demand for housing because other people came from other states and poured into Texas.
Sure.
And so it created, an artificial demand for property that raised our property taxes because we don't have a state tax in Texas. So, now we're trying to give some of the money back, and it's we're still not catching up with the true value of what the properties are versus how much they're taxed. And the taxes are still so high, we contest them, but they haven't gotten down to where they need to be. So when we're trying to talk about looking at property for multifamily, two of the biggest issues I see are taxes and insurance. Insurance is just crazy. And so when you put that into underwriting, it's really difficult to make things pencil out easily. You have to be creative with your debt and then kind of like a crystal ball to see, hey, are they going to stay the same? Are they going to go down? Can you take that chance and do that variable rate today, thinking they'll go down tomorrow? I mean, what's the plan and what's the backup to the plan?
Yeah, and this is emblematic of the point to where this market is the worst for first-time home buyers. It's not much better for second-time home buyers or move-up home buyers, because to your point about these increasing expenses, higher property insurance rates, and rather higher property taxes and higher property insurance premiums, they can't go like raise the rent on someone, okay? When we have income property and we're landlords, maybe we can raise the rent in order to compensate for those expenses. But if you're a homeowner, you might be at the mercy of your employer to get a raise. So you're in a more precarious position. So, we're just talking about why affordability is so bad. It's obviously more than just mortgage rates. Right now, the homeownership rate in the United States is about 66%. With affordability being so poor, I would expect the homeownership rate to fall to about 64%, maybe by 2025, to fall perhaps 2%, more or less, something like that. With every 1% decrease in the homeownership rate, there are 1 million more renters. So we can expect to see more renters. So as property investors, we can kind of play both sides of this. This poor affordability, it moves people out of the buyer pool and puts them into the renter pool. And I hope that translates to more rent increases.
I love it. Absolutely support all of that.
You can watch this one next.